The scent of grilled corn and charcoal hung in the air, mingling with laughter and the soft clink of glassware. It was the first Sunday of the month, the Rosales family barbecue, a tradition as old as my aunt's backyard garden and just as relentless. I stood near the patio trellis, sipping sparkling water from a paper cup, watching cousins pose for selfies and uncles argue over the best way to season brisket. "Still babysitting that triplex in Brookland, Mia?" my cousin Daniel called out, his voice thick with amusement and beer. "Must be a thrill, caulking tubs and chasing rent checks." I smiled thinly, shielding my face behind my cup. "Someone's got to keep the water running," I replied, my tone light and practiced. What I didn't say, I had just spent the morning finalizing contracts for a 48-unit EcoSmart complex in downtown DC. What I didn't say, that little triplex Daniel mocked was my first investment 10 years ago, bought with savings from a side hustle in college and a modest inheritance from my grandfather, the only man in the family who ever really listened when I spoke about zoning codes and ROI. To them, I was still the nice cousin with the art degree who somehow became a landlord. They saw chipped paint and late night calls about noisy neighbors. They didn't see the numbers, the network, the strategy. My uncle Victor, perched nearby with his second plate of ribs, joined in. "You know, Mia, my friend's daughter just got hired at Deloitte. They're still hiring. You ever think about doing something more stable? More stable?" Just yesterday, Deloitte's DC branch had offered to lease 3 entire floors in one of my properties near Union Market. Their head of expansion didn't realize that Santiago properties belonged to the same woman they brushed past at an entrepreneurship panel 2 years ago, when I was still learning how to sit at investor tables without being asked if I was someone's assistant. But I smiled again. I always did. "I'm comfortable where I am," I said, just like I had the last 10 times someone tried to rescue me from the so-called limitations of property management. My father stood by the grill, a pair of tongs in one hand and a furrow in his brow. His silence had always been heavier than his words. I knew what he was thinking, what he'd been thinking for years. "You had real potential, Mia," he once told me. "Top of your class. You could have been in New York, running deals on Wall Street." Instead, in his eyes, I was a woman who fixed fences and collected rent. If only he knew. If only he could see the blueprint I kept in my office, drawings for a mixed-use development on the Georgetown waterfront, a $160 million project already backed by 2 investors and greenlit by the city. If only he knew that the chic new restaurant my cousin Anna kept raving about, amazing cocktails, skyline views, was actually on the rooftop of one of my high-rises. But I never said a word. Because it was easier to let them underestimate me. Because when people think you're small, they stop watching your steps. "You hear about that new tower going up on Wisconsin Avenue?" Aunt Lydia asked mid-conversation, lowering her sunglasses to make eye contact. "They say it's going to change the whole area. About time, honestly." "Yeah, I heard something about that," I said casually, resisting the grin tugging at my lips. I'd signed off on the final elevation plans that morning. Solar panel integration. Modular office spaces. LEED Platinum certification. A green wall the length of the building's east side. The press wouldn't announce it for another 2 weeks, but I already knew it was going to be my most ambitious project yet. Daniel snorted. Meanwhile, Mia's collecting quarters from laundry machines. There it was again. That laugh. That tone. They thought I was still scraping by on duplexes and charm. What they didn't see, the LLCs. The holding companies. The developers who called me by my last name only. Santiago. Not Mia. Not Sweetie. Not landlord. Santiago, the woman who now controlled over 40% of DC's mid-market residential units east of the park. A few feet away, Daniel laughed at one of his own jokes, swirled his beer, and made another dig about clogged toilets. Later that night, I drove home, not to the garden-level apartment they assumed I still rented, but to the penthouse suite in my flagship building in Navy Yard. Floor-to-ceiling windows offered a full view of the river. On my desk, 4 acquisition packets, 2 lease agreements, and an invitation to speak at a real estate summit in Chicago. I didn't answer any family group chats that night. Instead, I reviewed structural bids for an innovation campus being co-funded by 2 local universities. It would sit right in the middle of a former industrial zone, a space I'd bought quietly, years ago, when it was worth almost nothing. Because I saw what they didn't. Because I wasn't collecting quarters, I was collecting neighborhoods. They still think I'm a landlord. Let them. Let them keep telling me I could have been great. While I quietly become legendary. Mornings in Navy Yard began with stillness, the kind only a few ever experienced at 30 stories above the river. My penthouse sat at the apex of a building I designed but never publicly claimed. The world believed it belonged to Santiago Holdings, a quiet LLC in a network of others. Few realized that Santiago was me. Each morning, I watched DC wake up through glass walls, buses weaving through the city grid, vendors setting up early outside the wharf, boats nudging gently along the marina. All of it sat beneath a skyline I had quietly, strategically, helped reshape. To the world, and especially to my family, I was still the landlord. And that suited me just fine. I kept a second office across town. Not the one my executives used, not the glossy marble-floored suite with its custom walnut furniture and investment war room. No, I kept a modest office, 3rd floor of a converted brownstone in Brookland, tucked between a dry cleaner and a yoga studio. It was for appearances. In that tiny space, I kept a worn laptop, a framed photo of my grandfather, and just enough outdated furniture to complete the illusion. That's where I met city inspectors, small vendors, or, more often than not, curious family members who just happened to be in the neighborhood. "You still working out of here?" My cousin Teresa had asked once, blinking at the chipped panes. "Yep," I said cheerfully, motioning toward the cracked blinds. "Still keeping it simple." She shook her head. "You know, you could apply for a management position at one of the big firms. I heard Urban Grid is hiring. It'd be more secure." I smiled. That very morning, I had signed off on Urban Grid's 5-year lease extension, for space they rented from me. My team had grown quietly, just the way I liked it. There was Jordan, my director of operations, who managed acquisitions and city permits like a maestro. Lena, our lead architect, had designed every major project since the Madison Lofts, and handled zoning negotiations like she was born in a courtroom. We held our executive meetings off-grid, often in a private residence I kept under another LLC on the edge of Georgetown. No signage, no digital trail. Just whiteboards, renderings, and strategy. Together, we had built a portfolio that spanned 6 DC neighborhoods and crept into Baltimore, Richmond, and even parts of Philadelphia. Mixed-use towers. Micro-unit apartments for students and young professionals. Modular retail pavilions that could adapt to tenant needs overnight. To the press, Santiago Holdings was an enigmatic mid-market disruptor. To my family, I was still Mia, the one with the triplex and a good heart. I'd stopped correcting them years ago. Not because I wasn't proud. But because I'd realized something. When people believe you're still struggling, they speak more freely. They offer unfiltered advice. They expose how little they truly see you. And from that lens, I had gathered everything I needed: motivation, leverage, and the space to move without interference. That summer, I finalized a deal I'd been working on for 18 months. A waterfront lot previously owned by a tangle of historical trusts and out-of-state investors. It would connect 3 of my existing properties, forming a continuous Santiago corridor of residential, retail, and green space along the Potomac, a generational legacy in the making. The purchase closed for $84 million. Paid in full. Through layered funding vehicles. No headlines. No interviews. Just a transfer of power, quietly signed at 7:48 a.m. on a Wednesday. That same afternoon, my uncle sent a group text about his daughter's internship. So proud of Sophia. She just landed a summer role with a boutique real estate firm. Maybe Mia can pick up some tips. The group chat reacted with thumbs ups and clapping emojis. I didn't reply. I just stared at the name of the firm in the screenshot. It was mine. I never corrected them. Not when they joked about clogged toilets. Not when they speculated that my duplex might be losing money. Not when they offered articles about alternate career paths. The illusion protected me. Letting them believe I was modest, unambitious, or stuck? That gave me freedom. I could move in shadows while they were distracted by spotlights. Still, there were cracks. At a family dinner that fall, my cousin Daniel shared a link about a new smart building going up near DuPont Circle. "Looks wild," he said. "Facial recognition elevators. AI lighting. No idea who's behind it, some shell company with international funding. Probably Russian." I reached for the bread. "I think it's Japanese," I said evenly. "Part of a green investment initiative." He waved his hand dismissively. "Whoever it is, they're killing it." I smiled politely. "That project? Mine." The one person who ever saw through the performance was my grandmother, Abuelita. She had passed years ago, but when I stood at the construction site for my first renovation, the cracked triplex in Brookland, it was her voice I heard. "No one's going to see it, Mia," she'd told me as I held a blueprint with shaking hands. "Not at first. But you build anyway. You build quiet. You build smart." When she died, she left me a note inside a recipe book. "Don't ask for permission. Plant roots, then watch the world realize you were there all along." That note still lived in my wallet. Folded and faded. Every deal I closed carried her name in some way, either in the project code, the fund designation, or the LLC alias. She was the only one who never needed convincing. The only one who saw the whole picture. My family still joked that I should network more, or that I was wasting my degree by managing rentals. I let them talk. Because in the background, I was preparing for something they'd never expect. A cross-city development that would redefine the East Corridor. 35 acres. A $310 million budget. Housing, co-working, public space, and transit links. The city was still finalizing permits. But I had already lined up funding, design, and partners. It would carry my family name for generations, but only in the smallest print. The bold lettering on the cornerstone would simply say, Santiago Group. And one day, someone in my family would walk by that building, never realizing who truly built it. I didn't expect the reveal to begin with a knock. Not a metaphorical one. A literal knock, on the door of the executive conference suite inside my downtown headquarters, Santiago Group Tower, a steel and glass monolith most of my family still hadn't connected to me. The meeting was supposed to be with Harbor and Finch, a boutique law firm representing a retail group interested in our new West Market redevelopment. I had been expecting their senior partner, someone I'd worked with before. But when my assistant buzzed the line, her voice had that unfamiliar, cautious edge. "There's a gentleman here," she said slowly, "asking for you. Says he's here in place of Edward Finch. His name is Marco Villanueva." I froze. Marco. My cousin. The same one who, just a few months ago at a family brunch, asked me if I ever considered finally getting a real job. The same one who once snorted at a podcast episode I was featured on, without realizing I was the guest. I told him to wait in the lobby, my assistant continued. Should I redirect? 1,000 options raced through my mind. I could send Jordan in. I could cancel the meeting entirely. I could slip into my private exit and be gone before he realized the truth. But I was tired of hiding. "No," I said. "Send him in." When the door opened, Marco was mid-sentence, tapping through emails on his phone. He didn't even glance up at first. "I'm here to meet with, Miss Santiago, regarding the lease extension on." Then he looked up. And the words died in his mouth. We stared at each other in silence, the conference room stretching suddenly long and echoing. "Mia?" he asked, blinking like he'd walked into a hallucination. "What are you doing here?" "I'm Mia Santiago," I replied calmly. "And I believe you're here to discuss a proposal with me." He took a step forward, looked around the room, at the floor-to-ceiling glass, the wall of architectural blueprints, the sleeked nameplate on the desk that read, M. Santiago, President and CEO. "This is your office?" I nodded. "This whole building?" "Yes. You run Santiago Group?" "I founded it," I said. 10 years ago." Marco sat down slowly, as if the weight of everything he hadn't seen was suddenly too much to carry standing. "But," he faltered, You were managing that triplex in Brooklyn. I was. That was my first property. You used to fix your own plumbing. I still do sometimes, I said with a small smile. Habit. He ran a hand through his hair, eyes scanning the room like he was still trying to find the trick, the camera, the alternate explanation. This doesn't make sense, he murmured. You let everyone think. I tilted my head. Let them think what, Marco? He swallowed. That you were just scraping by. I leaned back in my chair. And you believed it. He looked like someone had punched the wind out of him. For the next hour, I showed him everything. The development timelines. The acquisition maps. The strategic growth plan that took me from one broken triplex to controlling over $1.2 billion in urban property across 5 cities. I showed him renderings for the East Corridor Innovation Hub. The waterfront redevelopment. The international investment fund bearing my name. And with every new revelation, his posture changed, from disbelief, to awe, to something else entirely, shame. Does anyone else know? He asked, almost in a whisper. No, I said. You're the first. He looked at me with something approaching reverence, and guilt. You could have told us. I could have, I agreed. But why would I? He didn't answer. And so I asked the question I had waited a decade to speak aloud. Would any of you have listened? That night, Marco and I drove together to our aunt's birthday dinner, a garden party in Petworth, fairy lights and folding tables, the scent of empanadas and cilantro in the air. We arrived late. Intentionally. Marco was quiet the entire ride. I could feel the storm behind his eyes. At the party, our family greeted us like always, with hugs, jokes, and sideways questions about my little Rendels. I smiled and nodded, letting them think what they always had. But then Marco raised his glass. Before we eat, he said, clearing his throat, there's something you should all know. The table fell quiet. Mia's not just managing some triplex. She's not just a landlord. Everyone turned. Mia Santiago, he said, his voice shaking a little, owns Santiago Group. The tower downtown? That's hers. So is the West Market project. And the Georgetown redevelopment. She's built a billion-dollar company while all of us thought she was chasing tenants around. Silence. Forks hovered midair. Eyes widened. My father leaned forward, stunned. That's not a joke? I shook my head. It's not. Why didn't you tell us? My sister Anna whispered. Because I didn't need your permission, I said. And because I wanted to see who you were when you thought I had nothing. Reactions came in waves. Shock. Confusion. Some awe. A lot of silence. My aunt looked embarrassed. My father stared at me like I was a stranger. But not once, did I feel regret. Because in that moment, I wasn't the Mia they remembered. I was the Mia I had always been. Later, as I stood near the hedges watching the sky darken, Marco joined me. I'm sorry, he said quietly. I know, I replied. He looked out at the city beyond the trees. What happens now? I exhaled. Now? I said. Now we stop pretending. Now we start being honest. Letting them underestimate me was never the plan. But it became the armor I needed to build something real. They thought they were watching me struggle. But I was building. And now that the walls were up, the lights were on, and the doors were open, they had no choice but to walk through and see who I really was. The days after the reveal were a blur of contradiction, stunned silence and desperate phone calls, admiration wrapped in awkward apologies. My phone pinged constantly. Missed calls from aunts who used to send me job listings. Messages from cousins I hadn't spoken to since college graduation. Even my mother, who once gently encouraged me to get serious and go corporate, left me 3 voicemails in the same afternoon. None of them said the thing I really wanted to hear. We were wrong. They didn't know how. And I wasn't going to spoon-feed it to them. Back at Santiago Group headquarters, my team stayed focused. The East Corridor project had cleared its final legal review. The waterfront tower broke ground ahead of schedule. We were in the middle of negotiating a 12-building portfolio acquisition from a Canadian pension fund when the media caught wind of the story. Mystery developer behind Santiago Group revealed as DC native. From landlord to powerhouse, Mia Santiago owns half the city. The quiet queen of real estate. For years, I had worked under the radar, letting my brand, not my face, carry the weight. Now, I was visible. And with visibility came noise. I did one interview. A long-form profile with an independent business magazine that actually cared about substance over scandal. No flashy headline. Just a thoughtful narrative about urban planning, generational wealth, and the power of building without applause. I told the truth. Not just the headlines, but the in-between. About the exhaustion of proving myself in silence. About the moments I nearly gave up. About the real work behind the shiny buildings, eviction moratoriums, tenant protections, food access programs tied to retail space. I never needed the world to clap, I said. I just needed room to build. One evening, as the sun dipped below the Potomac, I stood in my penthouse kitchen flipping through property reports when the buzzer rang. It was Anna. My sister. The one who used to joke about my hobby business. The one who once offered to help me apply for a receptionist job at her firm. Now she stood at my door in black heels and uncertainty, clutching a bottle of wine she probably picked up last minute. I let her in. She stepped through slowly, eyes flicking over the artwork, the lighting, the full-length windows that framed the city like a living portrait. I didn't know, she said softly. You didn't ask. She flinched, but didn't deny it. I thought you were struggling. No, I said. You thought I was beneath you. The silence between us stretched, uneasy but honest. She set the bottle down. I want to understand, she said. So I told her. About the LLCs. The shell corporations. The long nights negotiating with banks that thought I was someone's intern. The years I kept quiet because every time I tried to speak, someone talked over me. She listened. Really listened. And at the end of it, she said. I was wrong. Finally. That weekend, I hosted a small dinner at my penthouse. Not for celebration. For closure. Just family. Marco came. Anna came. Even my father, though he said little and looked uncomfortable the entire time. We ate quietly. No jokes about rent. No digs about plumbing. Just curiosity laced with guilt. After dessert, I stood to speak. I didn't build this to prove anything to you, I began. I built it because I believed in a vision no one else saw. They watched me, unsure of where I was going. And for a long time, I stayed quiet because it was safer that way. Because I needed space to grow without being questioned. But when I saw how you treated me when you thought I was small, I knew something important. If success is the only time someone sees your value, you were never respected to begin with. My father shifted in his chair. My mother's eyes were wet. Anna stared at her wine glass. You judged me for being quiet, I continued. But you never asked what I was building in the silence. After they left, I stood alone on my balcony, the wind cool against my skin. Below, the lights of the city blinked like pulse points, steady, alive. My city. The one I had helped shape. Block by block. Deal by deal. Day by day. A week later, Anna sent me a text. I'd like to pitch for one of your legal contracts. But only if we earn it. I smiled. That was all I'd ever wanted. No shortcuts. No favors. Just merit. The months that followed were strange. I was invited to panels. Featured on podcasts. Offered book deals and keynote speaker spots. I declined most. Because I didn't need to be a celebrity. I was a builder. And there was still so much more to build. Some days, I still stopped by that old triplex in Brooklyn. The first one. The one they all mocked. The tenants had changed, the paint was fresh, and the mailbox now bore the logo of a Santiago Group subsidiary. But the bones were the same. I stood at the sidewalk one morning, coffee in hand, and watched a couple walk in with groceries, laughing. They had no idea who I was. They didn't need to. Because this wasn't about being recognized. It was about what I created lasting longer than anyone's memory of how I started. They used to call me just a landlord. Now? They call me CEO. But titles don't matter. What matters is that I never stopped believing in the version of myself they couldn't see. What matters is that I never asked for permission to become her. 6 months after the reveal, I stood at the podium of a private investment summit in Georgetown. Not a TED Talk. Not a broadcasted spectacle. Just a room filled with architects, city planners, community partners, and quiet capital, the kind of people who make real change happen long before the ribbon cuttings and headlines. On the screen behind me was a rendering of the East Corridor Renewal, a 35-acre project that would reshape one of DC's most neglected neighborhoods. We're not just breaking ground on buildings, I told the room. We're rebuilding trust, community, opportunity. No applause. Just nods. The kind that mean, we see it. We're in. This was what I had always wanted. Not the spotlight, the influence to use it well. Back at Santiago Group headquarters, my team worked quietly but with fire. Elena was finalizing vendor contracts for a zero-waste construction pilot. Jordan was spearheading a scholarship pipeline for students in Ward 8 who wanted to enter real estate, architecture, or urban development. We were growing, responsibly, deliberately. But not just in square footage. In impact. We just crossed the $3.2 billion valuation. Our properties stretched into 7 cities, with new inquiries from Boston and Minneapolis. But those were just numbers. What mattered more was how we were doing it. We converted old parking structures into pop-up community gardens. We built affordable housing without gutting the neighborhoods they belonged to. We offered long-term leases to local businesses at fair prices, even when the market could have demanded more. People didn't just want to invest in Santiago Group. They wanted to align with it. And my family? We were rebuilding something, too. No press releases. No viral dinners. Just slow repair. Marco, once my biggest skeptic, now ran point on a law firm that had become one of our most trusted external partners. He never asked for favors again, but he earned every bid he submitted. Anna's firm recently completed its first Santiago contract, a tenant protection policy built from scratch, with input from renters across 3 neighborhoods. When she submitted the final draft, she included a note. "Thank you for letting me prove I can stand beside you, not behind you." My parents still didn't fully understand what I did. But they showed up to the opening of our youth mentorship center. My father shook the hand of every intern. My mother brought pastelitos for the whole staff. It wasn't pride I saw on their faces. It was something better. Respect. I still lived in my penthouse. I still drove my reliable Corolla. And I still made monthly visits to that triplex in Brooklyn. It reminded me of who I had been, the version of me who used to patch drywall herself and field tenant calls at 2 a.m., with a spreadsheet open in one hand and a wrench in the other. The version of me they thought was lost. But she was the foundation. She was the blueprint. She never left. One evening, I walked through the lobby of our newest mixed-use property, an airy, plant-filled building in Navy Yard, and overheard a tour guide speaking to a group of interns. "This building's part of Santiago Group's adaptive reuse initiative," he said. "Their CEO is kind of a ghost, but apparently brilliant. Started with just a triplex and no funding." One of the interns asked, "Do we know her story?" The guide shook his head. "Not the full thing. She keeps it private." I smiled as I stepped into the elevator. "Let them guess." We held our annual strategy retreat 2 weeks later, not in a conference room, but in a renovated warehouse turned community space. Folding chairs. Notebooks. No cell phones. We asked hard questions. What does ethical growth look like in 5 years? How do we build not just for people, but with them? What does legacy mean if it's not attached to your last name? I shared something that day I hadn't told the team before. I used to think success meant proving everyone wrong, I said. Now I know it means proving yourself right, and using that proof to open doors for people who haven't been heard yet. There was a long pause. Then Jordan said, "That's why we're here." And that was the moment I knew we were ready for more. We announced our first Impact Fellowship the next quarter. Fully funded housing, training, and mentorship for young entrepreneurs from marginalized communities who wanted to rebuild the places they came from, on their terms. We received 2,000 applications in the first week. I read every single one. Because I remembered being overlooked. I remembered how heavy it was to build in silence. And now, I had the power to turn that silence into scaffolding. People still ask me why I didn't reveal my identity sooner. Why I let my family believe I was struggling. Why I chose invisibility when visibility could have changed so much. But what they don't understand is this. I wasn't hiding. I was constructing. Layer by layer. Brick by brick. And now, with the foundation built strong, I can finally speak without being interrupted. To the ones who doubted me, I'm not angry. I'm grateful. You gave me the clarity to lead without needing validation. To the ones still building quietly, keep going. The noise around you means nothing if your vision is true. And to those waiting for permission? Stop waiting. Start. Right now. Because legacy isn't the tower they name after you. It's the people who rise because you did. It's the city you shape. It's the mirror you hold up, not to gloat, but to show them who they could be if they stopped doubting themselves. It's the family you repair, the boundaries you draw, the bridges you build after the fires. That is legacy. And that's what I'm building now. Thank you for walking with me through this story, from the triplex to the skyline. Now I want to hear yours. Have you ever been overlooked? Told your dreams were small? Leave a comment below. I read every single one. If you're quietly building, quietly dreaming, quietly climbing, I see you. And when it's your turn to rise, let it be undeniable.